Right. So, yeah, it looks like Claire from Indie Rose Rituals is not able to join us today. I think that we have had a problem with the time connection because it's daylight savings here and she's in the UK. So it just adds a little extra layer of complexity. So we had originally said it was 7 a.m. her time, but because we've now changed our time, I think that I didn't communicate that with her. So it's my fault. However, what I would love to talk about today, and I always believe in divine timing. So if we're not meant to have our session with Claire today, we'll have it another time, is Tarpana, because at the moment we are in the 2-week portal, the 2-week window of Tarpana. I'm going to write that word in the chat box. Tarpana is a Sanskrit word and it means honoring our ancestors, honoring the people that come before us in our ancestral line. So it's a really beautiful time to talk about that because in the Vedic calendar, which is very closely connected to Ayurveda, every year for 2 weeks, there's a portal that's particularly potent around Tarpana, around honoring the ancestors. And we're in it right now. We're about 3 days into that 2-week portal. So I'd love to spend a little bit of time this afternoon talking about that with you and seeing what unfolds for all of us. Let's begin by just tuning in and also doing an acknowledgement. So just gently close down your eyes. Take a moment to take a deep breath. Bring your awareness into the space. Acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we're sitting. For me, that's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Acknowledging the wisdom keepers from our own personal culture and heritage, which we're going to talk a lot more about today in reverence of our ancestors. And acknowledging the teachers and guides in the lineage of Ayurveda and yoga, particularly Bhakti yoga. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. May all beings everywhere be happy and free. May the thoughts, the words, and the actions of my own life contribute in some way to that happiness and to that freedom for all. And just take a moment now to scan your awareness through your physical body to notice any sensations in the physical body that are present for you. There could be sensations that feel pleasant, spaciousness, ease, expansion. And there might be some little niggles of pain or tension, just noticing, simply observing. And then moving beyond simply the physical body, taking a moment to notice any sensations in the energy body, the pranamaya kosha. So within the space of the aura or within the space around you. And again, you may feel a sense of expansion and opening, or you may feel some contraction. And different parts of the body may feel different. Bringing particular attention now to the area around your heart. And cultivating a feeling of expansion in the heart space. You might wish to use the visualization of a flower opening from a bud into full bloom. Around the heart space, a flower opening from a bud into full bloom. And now visualizing sitting beside you, perhaps in a circle format, each and every woman on this call. So we are like sisters. We sit together in our healing, in our curiosity, in our sadhana, our spiritual practice. We sit in circle, we sit side by side, and we support one another. And then visualizing behind you all of the ancestors, particularly from your female line, your matriarchal line. The ancestral line that stands behind us. So your mother, your grandmothers, your great-grandmothers, see them now in your mind's eye, standing behind you and in support of you. And now visualize in front of you, and these may be children that you have given birth to yourself or other members of your family, the female line of future generations, your nieces, your children, your godchildren, children of your dear friends, your soul family, and their children and their children's children, grandchildren for some of you. And so as we sit in sacred circle, there are, to the side of us, our sisters, behind us, our ancestors, and in front of us, future generations. Feel yourself surrounded by their presence, their energy. And as you feel ready, gently open your eyes. So for those of you who just joined us, I just explained that we've had a slight change of topic for today. We're going to be focusing on Tarpana, which is the practice of honoring the ancestors. And this is a really important and potent practice that happens in the Vedic calendar, which is very closely connected to Ayurveda, every year for a 2-week window. The teachings in Ayurveda and in yoga tell us that we can access our ancestors at any time. It doesn't have to be specifically, at this portal or this time, but it's most potent. The veil is most thin around this particular window. And Brit's asking, is it astrological? And the answer is definitely yes. So it's very closely connected, or it's deciphered, I should say, through Jyotish. Jyotish is Vedic astrology. So all the different dates in the Vedic calendar are, aligned with the movements of the sun, the moon, the planets, and are given to us by astrologers known as Jyotisha, who are the those who have great insight into the way that the planets are influencing our lives. So when it comes to Tarpana, it's really interesting. Like, as we do a sort of modern day interpretation of this beautiful ancient practice in India, has been done for thousands of years. Well, the first thing I'll say about Tarpana is we don't really tend to think about or acknowledge our ancestors that much in our culture. Like, it's definitely something that we have less reverence or less regard for than in many other cultures, and particularly in the Vedic culture, which, as I mentioned, is so closely linked to Ayurveda. Our ancestors are seen as being really, really important. And the reason for that is because they hold the golden thread for our own healing and our own trauma. And those are modern words, but what they describe is the golden thread that is connected to our karma. So you have got karmic imprints in your body, which have come. They're called samskaras. They are traces, or sort of like memories, but not memories in the mind, memories in the body and even in the spirit, the soul, that have come from previous lifetimes, incarnations, if you believe in reincarnation. And even if you put reincarnation to the side, they've come from your own ancestry and from the line that you have inherited. And sometimes it's really easy for us to piece the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together. I just did a really, really, such an interesting session with a wonderful teacher called Jane Hardwick Collins. Some of you will know her very well. She runs the School of Shamanic Womancraft. She's absolutely wonderful elder in our community and a torchbearer of these teachings. And so, just to explain to you a little bit how this ancestral work can show up in our own lives, I'll tell you a little bit of my own story. My session with her was around, I wanted some healing and some insight around the birth of my fifth child, which is Leela, who is a year and a half old now. And for me, what had happened with the birth for her is that it had been very different to the birth of my other four children. So with my four boys, I'd had very easy, healthy, natural births that required no intervention. With Leela, it had been very different. There was a lot of pain, and I ended up having an epidural, which I really, was unhappy about. And it was just difficult. There were lots of elements of that birth that were not as I would want them to be. And so I had a lot of kind of confusion around why that had happened, especially after 4 natural births and being so immersed in childbirth education, being a doula, all the things that I do. And so I had this session with Jane to try and piece the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together. And what was so interesting is I expected that session to be, it was a 3-hour session, by the way. This woman doesn't mess around. It wasn't just a 20-minute quick chat. Like, it was a deep dive, very much immersed in ceremony and ritual. And I expected it to be a lot of talking about the birth, because normally when we're talking or we're healing a birth, like, I've trained in a modality known as birth story listening, where we narrate the story of the birth and then we kind of unpack it and we help the woman to reframe it and see it in a way that is less about self-blame, which is often what happens. So anyway, I thought we'd be talking about the birth. We spent the whole 3 hours, apart from the last 10 minutes where we touched on the birth, talking about my grandmother, my great-grandmother, my mother, the ancestral line, the matriarchal ancestral line. And the part that was so interesting is that Jane immediately highlighted that this is my daughter's birth, not my son's. And she's most likely, like, 99.9% definitely going to be my only daughter. I'm not planning on having any more children. And she brings with her a lot of the red thread. Like in yoga, we talk about the golden thread, which links us to our teachers and our teachers' teachers. But in this work, in ancestral work, we talk about the red thread, which is the matriarchal line. of my relationship with my mother, my mother's relationship with my grandmother, and back and back and back. And so we started with my great grandparents, and I told Jane everything I could remember about them. And then we moved to my grandparents and to my mother. And the other thing that came up, which I hadn't really connected at all, was that my daughter, apart from having a very difficult birth with her, is also very clingy. Like she's very attached to me in a way that my boys were not. And so after this whole story and unraveling and deep dive and kind of energetic immersion in the stories of my family line, it was much, much easier for me to understand what was going on with my daughter and the lessons that she had brought with her and the ways in which I could be of support to her and be a good mother to her. And one of the big threads, I mean, I won't go into all the details because it was a 3-hour session, so to do that would take forever. But one of the threads that came through was this pattern that has happened throughout my family, through the matriarchal line, of abandonment, this pattern of children and adult children being abandoned by their parents. So my grandmother was abandoned by her mother, which is my great grandmother, because she got pregnant illegitimately just after the war. And then my grandmother, the one who was abandoned, of course, she had that imprinting in her. So she was very absent in my mother's parenting journey. And so, of course, then the way that my mother parented me, there was a lot of distance there too. And so 3 generations of different flavors of not good attachment, broken attachment, right, in this female line. And then I have this daughter who comes in for no reason that I can fathom, after having had 4 children who are quite independent and robust, super clingy, like really clingy. And my perception is, what am I doing wrong as a parent? Why is she so clingy? Why is she not more secure in her attachment? And what Jane helped me to see is, it's a samskara. It's a thread of 4 generations now of women who have not felt secure in their attachment to their mother. And so it was a complete reframe for me, where I got to go, okay, my job in this lifetime is to be so available for her and so supportive of her need to be clingy that we heal this karma. This is the generation that this karma can be healed, by me just being available for her. And if she needs to sit on my lap all day, she can sit on my lap all day until she's ready to not need to do that anymore. And yeah, what a beautiful legacy. So that story is by means of explaining to you that these red threads exist for all of us, and that whether or not we have it could be abandonment issues, it could be addiction. That's another really strong one. Like if there is alcoholism or substance abuse or, some sort of addictive behavior, those threads run very, very deep. 3 out of 4 of my grandparents were severe alcoholics, so much so that all 3 of them died early, like young, of alcohol-related diseases. So that is its own red thread. All of these things that come through are in us. And modern therapy, like when we go and see a counselor or a therapist to kind of work this stuff through, it happens on the level of the mind. It happens in what in yoga we would call manomaya kosha. And I know that some of you in this session today are new to Ayurveda. Like we've just had a whole bunch of beautiful new women come into the training. So welcome to those of you who are very new. Some of the things that I'm talking about here you might not know what I'm talking about. But as you start going through the material in your course portal, and we're going to do our live sessions as well, this will all make a lot more sense. But for now, let's just say there are lots of different layers of ourselves, layers of our body. And as we go through this work with a counselor or a therapist, it often happens in the mind. So it's all like working it out in a kind of cognitive way. And that's really helpful. It can help you put together the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle. But what Jane helped me to do in my personal session with her, and in general, what the work of Tarpana and identifying red thread is about, is energy. It's not the mind. It's not like, oh, I work it out and now I understand it, because you can understand something and still be stuck in it, right? I mean, we all know this. We all understand how we should be doing things differently in our lives. It doesn't mean we make the changes that we need to make all of the time. whether it's around food or sleep or relationships or whatever it might be. And so when we feel and drop into the energy level, then actually what happens is we start to anchor down into something that can be shifted, not through thinking our way around it, but it can be shifted through our behaviors, through breaking patterns of behavior, and also through ritual and through ceremony. And this portal, this 2-week portal of Tarpana, is a beautiful opportunity for us to practice ritual, practice ceremony around changing and breaking and creating better red thread through our ancestral ties. So how do we do that? Well, one of the most simple and powerful ways to do that is to create an altar in your home. And I definitely recommend that you do this, you know, in this 2-week window, like today, if you can, for your female ancestors. So it can be really simple. It doesn't need to be elaborate. You can place some pictures of your ancestors on that space if you have them. Could be your mother, your grandmother, could be you with your mother or your grandmother, aunties, female cousins. We can also bring males into it, but I think for our work, it's particularly potent to be focusing on the matriarchal line. And then some simple flowers, perhaps some incense or a crystal or some items that feel resonant for you. The color that is useful to use for Tarpana practice is red. So you might want to have like a red little cloth or a red, some red flowers. Red is a really beautiful color to use. And this Tarpana window of 2 weeks moves into Navrati, which is the celebration of the goddess, and the color for that is also red. So it's definitely a good time to be using red. I want to open up for your comments and your questions, but one last thing I'll say is this: as we honor the ancestors and we create these altars, it's really not about everything they did was perfect and I'm honoring them because, you know, it was all amazing and we're just going to blinker out the trauma and the problems and the miscommunications. It's absolutely not about that. It's about honoring and celebrating all of the women in our line and acknowledging everything that they went through and sending love and healing and kindness and support to them and to ourselves as we have inherited those threads as well. So I asked my mum this week to send me some different pictures because I wanted to have, like, I've got pictures of my grandparents and my great-grandparents, but I wondered if there were perhaps more female, you know, women that had been in my lineage that I didn't have pictures of. And actually, as it happens, one of my great aunties, who was in her late 90s, passed away a couple of years ago, and my mum inherited all of her photographs, like all of her photo albums. And she was a very, very diligent sort of record keeper. She worked for the tax department, actually. And so she was very, very good at keeping very detailed records. So she had all these photos that were very carefully labeled with dates and names and where these people fitted in the family tree. And it's so moving. I'm going to post some of them in my social media over the next couple of weeks so you can see them if you want to go and have a look. But, you know, I'm looking at these women, and my mum sent me the details of who they are. And it's like, you know, an amazing, elegant black and white photo of a woman in Victorian or Edwardian outfit, looking into the camera with such a solemn face. And even, like, it sounds crazy, but I can even see threads of my mother and my grandmother in that face. Like, I can see threads of myself as I look at that face, which is, you know, like more than 100 years ago. And just to ponder, and then, you know, the label is like, this is your great aunt Janice or something like that, you know, from Lancashire. And to ponder what that woman's life would have been like, what she went through, how she lived, the losses, the joys, the hard work, you know, all the things that we experience. And to know that that's part of my ancestry, and that for you in your line, that's part of your ancestry. Is so fascinating. I mean, these days, actually, modern scientific research talks about a particular phenomena called epigenetics. You might have heard of this, which has to do with how physically our actual genetic makeup goes back. They reckon now 7 generations, right? So we're actually genetically influenced 7 generations back, which, you know, is mind-blowing to me. So, for example, and they've done studies around this. Again, I find this so fascinating. It's very closely linked to this idea of Tarpana and honoring the ancestors. If there have been times in your family in the past 7 generations where starvation has been an issue, or where people have not had good access to food, you will probably carry within you some, and I'm not, this isn't samskaras now. This isn't Vedic, like, woo-woo. This is like actual science. There'll be threads in your DNA of remembrance of starvation. And so then your tendency will be towards hoarding food, maybe even overeating, because there's this up to 7 generations back thread of, at some point, the lineage didn't have enough access to food. Isn't that just incredibly fascinating? And then if we bring in the energetic, of course, you know, that's a whole other story. The samskara of what it means if your mother, your grandmother, your great-grandmother didn't have access to food, or enough food, or wasn't able to feed her children, you know, that will have an impact on your own lived experience. So I've shared quite a lot of my own personal journey and story with you today, which I often don't do, but I hope that it is, my intention is to inspire you to do this type of research yourself and to think about things in this way yourself. So rather than just looking at your problems or your patterns or your areas where you feel stuck, look behind you and look in front of you. And if you have children, or children in your life that you're around often, know that you have a beautiful opportunity to change the Tarpana, to change the ancestral legacy, to be the picture that goes on the altar that was a chain breaker for addictions, dysfunctional behavior, abuse, all of those things. And as you look behind you, as we look behind ourselves to our previous ancestors, it's all about, how can I forgive? How can I show loving kindness? How can I be in compassion? How can I understand? How can I see my privilege and be in deep reverent compassion to the struggles of generations that came before me, including our own parents, grandparents, etc., etc. The photos were really moving for me, and like I said, you'll get to see them because I'm going to be posting them over the next few days on Instagram. But if you have the opportunity, if you have a relative that's still alive, particularly an elder, or, you know, someone who's good at documenting these things, ask them if they've got photos. You might be surprised what comes up. You know, these days we take photos so prolifically. Everyone's got 1,000 photos of everyone on their phone. But back in the day, you might only have had 1 or 2 photos of a particular person in your matriarchal line. And it's such a beautiful practice to collect those. In fact, those of you who are in Ayurveda Goddess live, doing the live calls with me over the next few weeks, we're going to do a practice around that where I'll be inviting you to share those photos with me, and we'll create a little bit of a Tarpana collage together. So that's my thoughts around Tarpana. There are other practices that we can do. There's specifically a practice where we create a mudra with the hands and we pour water through and use sesame seeds. This is a very traditional way of doing a Tarpana practice to honor the ancestors, which is a little bit more involved. I shared that today in the newsletter that I sent out. I think most of you will have received that. It's also, I'll link it in the notes for this call. It comes from my teacher, Mother Maya. But if you don't want to do something so involved and so elaborate, a brilliant start is creating that simple altar. Just placing your hand on your heart, taking a few deep breaths. Inhale, I am, silently, internally, I am. Exhale, say to yourself the words spirit, soul. Inhaling, I am. Exhaling, spirit, soul. Do this a few more times. Inhale, I am. Exhale, spirit, soul. Keep going, remembering the truth that you are beyond this body, beyond this lifetime, beyond the karmic threads and the samskaras. Pure spirit, a precious, holy soul, eternal. I am spirit soul. Namaste, everyone. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon. Take care, holy beings. Thank you.